Now that we've got all this data pouring in, what do we do with it? Artificial intelligence is now becoming seen as the thing that will be the most transformative technology overall in the middle years of the 21st century. One company has come sort of reborn to leap ahead of the pack in building an AI platform and in applications for that platform. And surprisingly, that company is IBM. So with Watson, which was really launched 5 years ago, IBM has taken what they call cognitive computing into the mainstream, and it's now taking it into IoT. So here to talk to us about the marriage of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things is Jason Jameson. He leads the IBM Watson Internet of Things in the Asia Pacific. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning. Welcome everyone to Everything IoT Leadership Summit. As Mark said, I'm Jason Jameson. I lead IBM's Watson IoT business, or Internet of Things business here in Asia. I've lived almost a decade out of Australia. I've spent time in India, 5 years in China, Malaysia, now called Singapore home. And so it's actually great to be back here in Sydney. I would echo that it was where I was born, but I do feel like a bit of a tourist now. It's been so long that I've lived here. But look, Watson, what's all this about? For those of you who remember the early era of computing, I'm talking about 1996, IBM created a computer and called it Deep Blue, a bit of a homage to Douglas Adams and Deep Thought in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it was Deep Blue. And the purpose of this computer was to finally establish computers' dominance over humans. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but Garry Kasparov was the world chess champion back then, grandmaster, all that sort of stuff. And you know, it was a multi-match playoff, and it came down to, I think it was match 4, match 5, and of course the computer won. And Kasparov couldn't believe it, and he was quoted as saying, "That machine thinks." And you know, so from there, you fast forward to 2011, and for those of you who know, there's a US game show called Jeopardy, which is a bit like Sale of the Century, but in reverse. You know, you actually are given the answer, and you need to ask the question. And so, IBM created a computer called Watson, and was put up against the two top champions of this game show. And you probably saw the news story. The computer just took the words that the questions are read out, the computer understood, interpreted it, and then gave the answer, and it beat both of those champions comprehensively, actually. And once again, it showed that computing now could outsmart the smartest folks in the room. And now here we are today, and talking about Internet of Things. And what I want to be able to do is talk a bit about how cognitive IoT is going to change the world for the better. We've heard a lot from Genevieve and from Matthew about some of the important social responsibilities we have as we go down this path. And IBM, started this journey around IoT probably 7 or 8 years ago. We called it Smarter Planet at the time. Talked about things like instrumented, interconnected, intelligent devices. And that's now morphed into this concept of Internet of Things. But we're doing things like soil analysis and water analysis in India. We're working in smarter cities all around Asia, the Philippines, in China, even in Australia, etc. So it is an interesting area. But I want to talk about what it means for us as consumers, as people who work for companies, large and small, and really the impact it'll have, and what some of the best are doing, and also what some of the things to look out for. So look, here's the little clicker. All right. So the Internet of Things, digitization of the physical world. I'll tell a quick story. When I started my career some time ago, one of the first jobs I had was to actually put companies onto the internet. And it seems quite quaint to think that there was a time when we weren't connected. But there was a time when we had to, as consumers, deal with companies through physical, face-to-face, through postal mail, fax. I don't know, has anyone sent a fax recently? and of course, telephone. And I remember, that this was quite frustrating. If you wanted to get something done and it was Friday afternoon, you're pretty much screwed. And of course, so my job involved connecting companies to the internet. This meant putting in place a firewall, a proxy server, a mail relay, a lease line, which is probably 64K speed to one of the few internet points of presence in the country, getting the domain names registrations done through a government agency. And suddenly what you'd find is that these companies, the employees had external email for the first time. They could browse HTML 1.0 web pages with Courier 12-point flashing, underlined, coloured text, very exciting. But from those formative days, things like, parcel tracking suddenly became something you could do on the internet. You could order books online. And eventually, internet banking and, of course, the establishment of all the internet juggernauts such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. Now you're wondering, why am I telling that story? Well, I see where we are right now with IoT is very much like we were in the early days of connecting companies to the internet. What actually came out of being connected really transformed our existence, right? If you think of the 20 years we've had connectivity around the internet, or 22 years or whatever, it's been a phenomenal journey. And we are right to Genevieve's point about where are we on the hype curve? Well, I think it's still very early days. There's lots of hype, but we're actually realizing that it's early days. There's a lot to be seen and to come of this. But back to digitization. We've all seen industries completely digitized. We've seen what Apple did with the music industry, digitizing it down to MP3s or lossless formats and whatnot. We've seen Netflix do the same thing with the film industry and video on demand. I mean, I don't know if anyone waits to watch anything on TV these days. I think we all just sort of use IPTV or on demand, Netflix, mobile devices, whatever, to watch this stuff. It's really changed consumption of content. It's changed our experience as people. But we're now getting to the point where we're digitizing a lot more. Things like movement, tracking steps, tracking location, time and place. We're tracking all sorts of digitizing a whole bunch of things that go beyond just simple things like media that we could normally do. It's things about our lives that we're tracking and digitizing. And so this digitization is going to have a profound impact. Where you drive a car, where you eat, where you sleep, a lot of this information is becoming available. And I think the point on the albatross, I really like that one where the leg goes out and says, here's the pact that we're making. I think a lot of us do this with privacy. I think that's what we're doing. And I'm not going to lecture about privacy and how IoT can sort of be something that is both good and bad in that respect, but it is something for us to remember. But the point on digitization is that it really is going to change the way that we treat the world here and the way that we interact. Well, that's a big echo there. So look, I think the other thing is, of course, retail is another area that's been digitized dramatically. Beacons and proximity marketing. We've all seen Minority Report. That's an example, and that's obviously homage to Philip K. Dick as well, who came up with that story. So clearly similar backgrounds here. But machinery, automotive, everything. The world is really changing. So look, what we're seeing is some major shifts. Now, the market shifts are as follows. There's really sort of three things that we're seeing. Organizations are really moving from exploring to transforming. The companies that have been most successful are the ones who have these strategies to capitalize on IoT in their day-to-day operations, right? To improve operations, to improve customer experience, and so on. And ultimately transform the industries. We're not there at the transformation stage yet. I mean, an example of transformation is like insurance, where, if you have a car, you typically pay insurance either annually or quarterly. It's pretty kind of, how old are you? What type of car do you drive? Okay, here's your premium. Now, there's obviously some, actuarial models that underpin the risk and how they calculate that, but it's not particularly granular. But imagine this, right? My team has built a sensor that plugs into the OBDI port on your car. It's 3G. It tracks, the GPS, of course. It has motion sensors, but it also links to the cloud. And it connects to things like weather data and social data. So now, when you're driving your car, you kind of know, firstly, well, through this technology, we know where you are, how fast you're driving, how erratically you're driving, what the weather's like. And insurance companies are saying, hey, look, we want this information so we can charge very granular pricing policies for insurance. So if you drive on a Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the sunny weather, in no traffic, your insurance costs are going to be very low. But if it's Friday night, late, high speed, raining, lots of traffic, it's going to cost you a bit more. So the idea here is that, for us, it can mean, as consumers, it can mean that you can have more granular experience with these organizations, with companies. And, who's to say that potentially, if you're prepared to share some more privacy data, you may not even have to pay for insurance as much as others. So there's some interesting stuff that's happening, but that's the first part of transformation. The other thing is that we're seeing is that, insights from new forms of data is really the key to competitive differentiation. This is really about how creatively businesses can use the data that's coming in from different sources to transform their core functions. We know that by 2020 there's going to be 30 billion connected devices. I saw an IDC report that said 30.3. I don't know why they got so precise, but that's great. There were 12 billion, or IDC 12.1 billion connected devices last year. So we're seeing phenomenal growth, right? I mean, I know at my home I have close to 40 devices with an IP address, and I'm not that freaky, right? It's just happened to be lots of different devices. It's going to, for us in our homes, we're going to see so much more around this. But basically, this differentiation, being able to take these new data sources and do stuff with it will make a huge difference. IBM last year bought, you may or may not know, the world's largest IoT commercial network, which is called the Weather Company. Handles 24 billion transactions a day, which is about 7 times more than Google. And this is another example of external data that will transform industries. If you have weather data, you can start to link it to your own corporate data and what your customers are doing, you can start to make more intelligent kind of decisions around where you place, for example, merchandise on a rainy day. Heard all the stories, raining, get the umbrellas out, all that sort of stuff. But even when you start linking it with things like social media information, and we have a partnership with Twitter, you start to be able to get insights on where there's a whole bunch of activity going on, be it, it could be events, that are happening, could be fun runs, all that sort of stuff. You can really start to get this really complete view of what's going on with your customers, with society. So, this is differentiation. And the third part is that the digitization of the physical world really is making IoT a critical priority for the C-suite. Chief executives and so on are wondering, am I going to be, Ubered in the same way the taxi industry has kind of been Ubered? So this is where, IoT can absolutely disrupt industries. And in the same way the internet disintermediated a whole bunch of folks who didn't add value in the value chain. I think you're going to see the same thing with IoT. So really, it's about building strategies and looking at building additional capabilities and partnerships and so on here around IoT to ensure that major companies and small companies as well can rethink their existing operating models. So I think that the latest data says that within the next 2 years, I've got to read this here, it says 2/3. Keeps changing. 2/3 of Global 2000 CEOs will have digital transformation at the center of their corporate strategies. And this is at the center of the corporate strategy. So this is, really starting to amp up. All right. So, the rise of cognitive IT. It's like the rise of the machines. I deliberately chose that title because I do think we have a responsibility not to let it get out of control, but it is, as Mark mentioned, artificial intelligence is really the future for IoT. Now, I remember where I was when I first heard the phrase Internet of Things. I don't know if anyone else can remember it. For me, it was very early 2010, and I was sitting in a meeting in China with one of the regional governments. Actually, it's in Shanghai. I was living in China at the time. And in the meeting, I heard this phrase, Internet of Things. being talked about. And I kind of didn't sort of thought, was this a mistranslation? As people tell me, Internet of Things. I'm going, but that's what the Internet is. It's an Internet of computers, you know, things, I guess, if you can't find the right word. And they kept repeating it. I'm going, what are they talking about? And so I had to ask, I said, what do you mean, Internet of Things? Right? Isn't that what we have already? And the answer that they gave me was really insightful. Well, it was impactful to me because, you know, this world of connected things beyond computers, right? It was, you know, about machines being connected, about cars, street lamps, roadways, you know, you name it. And this was the government talking about it in that context back then. And then, as I said, if you sort of fast forward to now, which is 6 years later, and by the way, I think the first time that's recorded Internet of Things was used was 2009, so I wasn't too late to the party, but clearly wasn't there from day one. But, you know, fast forward to 2016, and we're now moving from that traditional form of sort of from connected IoT to cognitive IoT. So let me explain a little bit about that, because this is the essence of where we see IoT going. Firstly, it is revolutionary because, you know, this will be a way of us interacting with the world of connected things. Firstly, the first point here is, you know, it uses, so cognitive IoT will use domain knowledge and actively learns from things, their context, and the way people, us, interact with them, right? So it understands complex environments, it can organize, analyze structured, unstructured data, you know, recognize patterns, anomalies, deduces what's normal, you know, all this sort of stuff, and then proactively obtains and analyzes the results and uses all the data to solve problems. That's the first thing. So it learns from things, context, and interactions. That's a really important point about cognitive, because it is about making stuff thinking, right? The second thing is that the cognitive IoT enables systems of things to adapt. And that means, and evolve and make themselves more useful and robust over time. The definition here of IoT is both to receive information and send it back to then get, you know, act, right? And we talk about making things smarter. And this is one of the key things. So they actually take care of themselves. You've got, you know, they evolve over time. They act on our behalf where appropriate as kind of machine agents within established parameters, right? So, you know, sensor-enabled safety features on cars or energy-saving controls in buildings, walk in and out of a room, you know, lights go on and off, all that sort of stuff, you know, and learns from experience. This is all about making things more efficient and more effective. Because I do think that, you know, IoT kind of gets that area under the curve of human wastage. It sort of can start to eliminate a lot of that if we do it right. And then the final thing is around cognitive. It relates insights to people in ways that we understand, such as natural dialogue, text, you know, visual cues, and basically all that stuff to help human understanding. This is basically, you know, in fact, one of the key things we see around cognitive is the ability to have natural language communication. This is what computing is all about. So, you know, I mean, it's, yeah, in fact, and I think the other thing I wanted to point out on this is why cognitive, right? And there's a very practical reason for it. If you think about the amount of data that's being generated, and it's measured in the zottabytes or whatever, I mean, just massive, massive amounts of data. Traditional ways of acting on data meant building data models. And the way that we've been doing that these days with companies is having a bunch of data scientists. There physically won't be enough data scientists in the world to handle this vast quantity of data, being able to update models based on changing circumstances and so on. So you really do need to delegate this task down to computing. You know, we've got 30 billion connected things throwing off data, and 40% of all the data in the world being generated by these connected things. You know, you're going to see a major shift in how we manage this. In fact, the mix of data has changed. It used to be a lot of it was corporate transactional data, you know, like the majority. It was just last year that non-traditional data, social media and video and all that sort of stuff, has surpassed transactional data as the biggest contributor to the growth in data. So, you know, it needs new ways to analyze it. All right. So that's cognitive. What I want to do is quickly talk a little bit about the drivers, and I have like 12 minutes here, that we're seeing organizations embracing cognitive IT with. So the first thing is operational performance, right? Everyone wants to do something, do more with less. We have examples of a railroad company in the US, CSX, who are saving, $3 million a year by connecting all the locomotives, being able to get the trains running on time. Look at how they can predict issues with maintenance through capturing data from sensors and so on. But this is the whole idea here is that things can be done faster. They deliver with deliver things on time, lower cost, and that benefits all of us. Another example, which is a picture here, is the port of Cartagena. And if you're like me, every time I hear Cartagena, I think of the movie Romancing the Stone and Michael Douglas and whatever else. But Port of Cartagena have done IoT. It's really a hybrid model of cognitive IoT to manage the 40 million tons of freight that they have, of cargo that moves through their largest shipping terminal. So what they've done is they've put a whole bunch of smart capabilities on the edge of their network. Because one of the things, I know Matthew touched on it, that we have with IoT is that the communications infrastructure isn't particularly great in a lot of the places where you want to be able to take action. And so, with our partnership with Cisco, we've put edge smart devices at the edge that can take the data, have some inbuilt smarts in it to interpret the data, and then provide the right kind of action or insight so that they can act on it. And so, really, even though all the data is actually stored in the cloud later on, so we can analyze it and take even better action. But basically, this is edge computing and cloud computing merged into one, and it is going to be a key trend with IoT going forward. And that'll help us address that, unreliable and costly kind of connections that exist right now. Consumer experience is another area. This is all about providing an experience and services that adapt, evolve, and cater to our needs, right? We all expect to be understood as customers. When you are understood as a client, it builds loyalty. It also is a satisfying experience for all of us. So, for example, we're working. We actually got a cognitive store advisor application called Watson Store Advisor, working with one of the world's largest retailers to provide a 360-degree view of the environment in stores. So we've basically able to digitize nearly every aspect of a store's operation: RFID tags, sensors, cameras on, say, perishable goods, etc. So that we know what's on the store shelves, what's in the refrigerator, what the expiry dates are, all that sort of stuff. This is starting to save millions of dollars a year in spoilage costs, right? So, one of the things we do is, we don't want to waste. We consume enough as humans. This is another great way to reduce that wastage, optimize inventory costs for firms, so it's a win-win. The other thing, of course, is we can include weather forecasts into all of this. We can work out where and how we, what stocks need to be done, whether there's an upcoming local events like a concert, a parade, a graduation, and sort of suggest the merchandising and product placement strategies there. The other thing is industry transformation. This is where you're going to start to see some unconventional partnerships and companies transform from what their core business is to a different type of business. We're doing some work with Kone, for example. Everyone will say they do elevators and escalators, and actually what they tell you is their core business is the movement of people. Once you start tracking and censoring that sort of stuff, not censoring, telemeterizing, I guess is the word, getting the data, where people, where they move, how they flow. That makes our life a little bit easier, walking through shopping centers, airports, you name it. Another one is Daimler, right? Daimler's been in business since 1886, making cars. They've now transformed and created this Car2Go, which is, I think there's 12,000 connected cars. And I think it's 1.2 million members who use this to book a car and basically use a car when they need it. And this is a service that the market was demanding. IoT enabled it. And really what you've seen is it's transformed Daimler from a car manufacturer to a transportation provider. So you're going to see a lot more of this with IoT. The fourth transformation that we're seeing, or fourth key area of IoT, is around institutional expertise. We've all heard stories of engineers in production plants who can put a screwdriver to their ear and listen to the machine and know if it's working well or not, who can detect the smell of oil in the air, can detect a rattling bearing. That kind of institutional knowledge sits in the grey matter here in people's heads. And this is really interesting because, when you start to think about what would happen if you could share that expertise, what could happen if you could capture that, you can start to really sort of optimize the preventative maintenance, for example, is one of the key things, particularly with very asset-intensive industries. The other area is if you can institutionalize knowledge around elderly care or aged care. We talked about people falling over and that sort of thing, with linked back to cows and so on. But this is another area where, if you have when homes are set up to track the movement of people through them, or aged people, you may not need to have 24/7 care. You'll know if they're getting around okay or not, and if they have a fall, these sorts of things can be triggered. And we're doing some work with that, I said once again, around IoT. So, this is basically where cognitive IoT can help, because it knows if someone is okay or not based on behaviours, based on learned experience, and it comes down to each individual there. And look, and I think finally the really important area is around using IoT to drive environmental leadership. Having lived in China for 5 years, I think I got permanent cough from the air quality, but no, you sort of see what environmental degradation looks like. Of course, you don't have to go too far in Australia to see it as well. And I think this is one of the key areas where we have a responsibility as people to ensure that we hand the planet over to our subsequent generations in at least as good a condition as we inherited it. So we're doing work with companies like Siemens to reduce the energy consumption of buildings, for example. 100,000 plus buildings, and eliminating tens of millions of tons of CO2 through efficient use of building air conditioning. If it's raining outside or it's cold, you don't need to run the AC full bore. All sorts of simple stuff. It sounds simple, but we've never connected it, right? And this is where we start to see that. The other thing that we've been doing in China, we've got this Green Horizons initiative as IBM, and we've been working with the officials government or city officials in Beijing to help them deal with the problems they have with air quality by measuring and getting insights into what weather conditions lead to, what sorts of pollution and the low-level, ozone and so on that really does, cause all sorts of health issues. So, from traffic cameras, the satellites, we're collecting data from social media, and that really helps the Beijing city officials optimize their plan to deal with the air quality and try and keep the sky blue. So really the question is, how do we realize all this and all these key drivers of cognitive IoT? And I hear Siri talking there. So really, what are the sort of these, once again, three things that we're seeing, after thousands of client engagements, stretching back over many, many years, we're seeing some key behaviors by clients who are leveraging IoT. And these can be distilled into really three core areas. The first thing is to build a platform, effectively providing all the engineers, developers, the data scientists and so on with a platform to explore, invent, etc., and learn from IoT. And really this is actually giving people something to play with. The second thing is to solve, to use these platforms and perform analytics and so on, improve the design, drive new levels of operational performance, and really help engage. This is about helping engage clients so that their customers as firms to, what does this IoT data mean? How can you combine it with other data? All that sort of stuff to build progressively deeper insights. And the final thing is really to begin the cognitive journey. It really does involve aligning stakeholders across the business, because this, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a transformation for every company that exists today. And this is where everyone, from those folks dealing with clients to those developing products and services, for those who are involved in the distribution and so on. And really it's about building these strong ecosystems around what we see as physical settings, be it the vehicle, the home, the office, so that you can exchange the data across those boundaries. And then, this will help organize, I think, as we go through this transformation, companies will identify new sources of revenue, new sources of, or new ways to service their clients more effectively. So look, I'll wrap up with just some final thoughts here, because I had a lot of other stuff, but we'll stop here. So IoT is so important that IBM's spending $3 billion to really build out this business, to take what we've built around cognitive, to take what we've built around smarter planets, smarter cities, and bring it all into one kind of area of focus. And as I said, there's lots of stuff you'll be seeing from us, and we'll be doing work with autonomous vehicles across with all the major manufacturers. And we actually even did, with Local Motors, a crowdsourced 3D printed cognitive autonomous vehicle that's now in National Harbor in Maryland, driving around merrily. You basically get in, tell it where you want to go, and it does it. Right? You can ask, well, how long before I get there? It responds. I mean, that is the future of transportation, quite frankly. So there's stuff like that. You will see a lot more around agriculture and the responsibility of corporations and governments in ensuring we have a sustainable food supply, water supply. And when I used to live in Malaysia, we did some work with the government there around water supply and drainage and so on. So it is a really exciting space. But it's making devices smart, embedding intelligence into everything. Microwave ovens, washing machines, cars, that's the future. And the cognitive dimension of that, I just want to sum up, will be when we can talk and it can respond, it can engage in a natural discussion, and the future is a lot closer than you think. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Good luck with the rest of the conference.